If you're not already on the Data Skeptic newsletter, and we send it out same day as the show, so if you haven't seen that, you're not on the list. Head over to dataskeptic.com, scroll down just a little bit, and put your email in the box. You'll get an extended bio on the guest and a little behind-the-scenes stuff. In fact, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to reveal what the next season's topic will be to the newsletter list first. So if you'd like to know in advance of January 2023, sign up now at dataskeptic.com. When people are served advertising through a newspaper, radio, or television, we instinctively understand those advertisements are not targeted directly at us. Although for TV, that's not necessarily true anymore, at least on smart TVs. For the most part, it's only internet advertising that supports fine-grained targeting, or even nano-targeting. Again, we instinctively understand that. So this really begs the question, do people's perceptions of ads change with the knowledge or the assumption that that ad is targeted or even hyper-targeted at them? Today we unpack that question under the lens of weight loss ads on the internet.
My name is Liza Gak, and I'm affiliated with the UC Berkeley School of Information.
And what are you studying there?
I am a third-year Ph.D. student in the School of Information. My research sits pretty squarely in the field of human-computer interaction. I'm really interested in social computing. What that means is basically how computers shape our society and vice versa. I'm really interested in how people are harmed online and how they can collectively heal from it, especially in how young people use online spaces to negotiate their identity and relationships.
So being harmed online is, I'm sure, a broad category. We're probably going to get into one specific aspect of it today, but is there a taxonomy or a general survey of ways in which people can be harmed online?
There's been a lot of existing research on how we can think about online harms, but I use that to mean a pretty broad scope of online harms. I'm really interested in the kind of harms that are not easy to see or are not quite apparent, which is a concept that we get into in the paper, which is slow violence, coined by Rob Nixon, a post-colonial environmental scholar. And I'm really interested in these kind of slow violences that we might see online that aren't always like the most egregious forms of online harms like harassment or doxing or overt privacy concerns.
Your paper was the first in which I have to confess I encountered the term slow violence. Would you mind providing a rough back-of-the-napkin definition?
So, like I said, that term was coined by Rob Nixon, and we thought it was really relevant into thinking about online harms. Some scholars have done this in the past, and we thought that that was really apt in thinking about the ways that our participants described targeted weight loss ads and the effects that they had on them. So slow violence is a concept that describes when the cause of the violence is separated from the effects of the violence through space and time. Rob Nixon uses this to describe climate change and environmental harms, but we're really thinking about this accumulation of everyday harm that happens online that accumulates to have broad, wide-reaching effects.
Well, the specific research we're going to discuss today, as you mentioned, is about weight loss online. And certainly online, anything digital and digital advertising is pretty different from traditional forms of like radio, TV, newspaper. Is it still useful to look for lessons from the scholarship on these offline modes?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we did in thinking about online weight loss advertising. We actually went back to some older like media studies research and thinking about how offline advertising about weight loss might help and looking at feminist critique and pushback to that. So something that we did is we looked at this scholar, Jean Kilbourne, and her research in thinking about the ways that weight loss and the values of thinness have been prevalent and really strong throughout Western American society. We thought about how those messages haven't really gone away, but we were really interested in thinking about how algorithmic delivery of those messages had the potential to be so much more harmful. So that's something that our participants talked about in our interviews. They saw the harms of, like, if they saw a TV commercial about weight loss, but the individualized algorithmic delivery felt so much more personalized and so much more targeted, and therefore had these kind of very individualizing effects when it came to those messages. Whereas they spoke to the fact that it felt easier to dismiss when it was just a TV ad that didn't really have a particular audience in mind.
All of these ads are very targeted, and for whatever reason, I personally have slipped through the net of targeting. I have not been Googling weight loss. Maybe I should be Googling it, but I haven't, so I don't see these ads. So I guess I'm a little curious if you've seen some. Are they banal or insidious? Would I be offended by some of them? What's the general, I guess, candor of some of these ads?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because almost everybody that I've talked to, I talk about weight loss advertising, and almost everybody says, I haven't seen that. And then they come back to me in 2 days and are like, I've been seeing so many weight loss ads. Just because if you're not attuned to it, or rather, if you're not in that vulnerable state, you might not really notice that it's happening. And sure, you might slip through the cracks of targeting, but I think this is pretty pervasive. These ads are probably just mildly annoying to most people, but I think to the people who are vulnerable to them, they demonstrate a serious potential for harm because of the promises that they make. So a lot of the promises are like, lose X amount of weight in Y number of days with our method. Or, yeah, they'll have that potential for interaction where somebody at their most vulnerable might really put a lot of stake into an online quiz that they make. So another thing that was really prevalent in our interview data was that our participants were really frustrated by the lack of scientific rigor in weight loss advertising. And I think this is a problem that goes beyond weight loss advertising, but advertisers don't really have to verify their content or substantiate it with scientific evidence. And I think this is especially a problem when it comes to health-related advertising. So a lot of our participants were pretty frustrated and felt like this was a great reason for harm, that much of the promises and methods used in weight loss advertising are not scientifically substantiated or just lack any kind of rigor when it comes to the medical field.
Do you think that there could be something even a bit insidious going on? Like a TV ad goes out to all of a metropolitan area, a targeted ad might go specifically to me. And if they wanted to spend a lot of time and technology, perhaps they could hyper-personalize it. Are those things that this industry is taking advantage of, to the best of your knowledge?
After doing this research, I feel pretty cynical about it, but maybe that's not always the best outlook. I feel like the engagement with these ads is just so much more higher when somebody is vulnerable, and our participants even described this akin to some kind of like digital self-harm. So I do believe that it's pretty insidious, but again, we don't have any like concrete evidence that I can point to, just because there's such a deep lack of transparency in how these ads are created and targeted.
Is there any sense of, I don't know, maybe the scope and the scale of the problem? Like, what's worse, the online ads or teenage cigarette smoking?
Mm-hmm.
That's not really apples to apples, but how can we estimate how serious of an issue it is?
That's really hard to say, because I was really interested in how these kinds of ads can affect people with histories of disordered eating.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say the effects on the individual person are pretty deep when they have that vulnerable history. But I think rather than looking at this as an issue with weight loss ads, I'd kind of like to look outwards and think about ads that use sensitive health data in general. So this isn't just a problem confined to weight loss ads or disordered eating, but something that we started to look forward to is thinking about how data about smoking, cigarettes, gambling, other kinds of chronic illnesses, AIDS, HIV, how that data can be used to target people at their most vulnerable.
Thanks to our annual sponsor, Weights and Biases, the developer-first ML platform that gives you experiment tracking, dataset versioning, and model management. Their solution integrates with TensorFlow, sklearn, XGBoost, Hugging Face, and literally every other framework I could think of. Integrating with your model training process takes just a few lines of code. Once your machine learning code base or notebook is wired up, you've just unlocked the next level of productivity. The Weights and Biases platform collects, aggregates, and beautifully displays all of your key metrics and telemetry so you can track your model training in real time and compare different runs. Have you ever had to screenshot a matplotlib graph that you drop in an email or in Slack to show your boss the results of your work? That's like serving a gourmet dinner in a cardboard box. With Weights and Biases, all of your collaborators can see the results of different runs with an idealized interactive suite of tools. If you're on or leading a growing team of machine learning practitioners, you need to investigate if Weights and Biases is the right solution for you. Get started at wandb.me/dataskeptic and mention us when you request a demo. Cyber criminals are evolving. Their techniques and tactics are more advanced, intricate, and dangerous than ever before. Industries and governments around the world are fighting back, unveiling new regulations meant to better protect data against the rising threat. Today, the world of cybersecurity compliance is a complex one, and understanding the requirements your organization must adhere to can be a daunting task. But not when you travel with the pack at your back. I'm talking about Arctic Wolf, the leader in security operations. They're on a mission to end cyber risk by giving organizations the protection, information, and confidence they need to protect their people, technology, and data. Their new interactive compliance portal helps you discover the regulations in your region and industry and start on the journey towards achieving and maintaining compliance. Visit arcticwolf.com/skeptic to take your first step. That's Arctic, ARCTIC, arcticwolf.com/skeptic. Well, some of the things I'd like to know about are who's being targeted and what are some of the responses. And I guess the only way with, advertising being kind of a black box that you can get to any of that data is to kind of go directly to the sources you did and conduct a survey. Could you talk a little bit about how you found your respondents?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the challenges that we had in thinking about this problem was that if I just asked you, can you describe a targeted ad that you saw today? You wouldn't really know what to say. You would be like, I maybe saw something about XYZ. And then if we ask you about a targeted ad that you saw a month ago or a year ago, that's even harder to think about. So we really wanted to think about talking to people that had already made sense of these harms and had already collectively discussed these ads in community. So we went to those online communities that had already been having those conversations. We recruited from a Reddit community that is focused around intuitive eating, which is an eating philosophy that has been developed by dietitians and nutrition therapists as a path to recovery from eating disorders. So that community had already been talking about targeted weight loss ads and trading, tips and tricks for how to mitigate them, or just like general reactions. Hey, is anybody else seeing this? So we thought that those conversations were really interesting, and we wanted to talk to the communities that were having them because we could just dive right into talking about it rather than just reminding people, hey, have you seen this? We went to those communities to talk to people who were interested. And in terms of who's being targeted, most of our respondents identified as women, although not exclusively. I can't say that this is the only group that's being targeted by weight loss ads, but definitely a majority of people who were already starting to make sense of this were women, average ages from 18 to 35.
What were some of the questions you asked or the overall profile of information you were looking to collect?
Yeah, so we conducted about 21 semi-structured interviews with adults who felt like they were harmed by targeted weight loss ads and had histories of disordered eating. We broke that interview into about 2 sections. So the first part was aimed around talking about ads themselves. So I had participants choose between 2 ads, and we kind of dissected that ad and talked about it. And that really gave participants a concrete opportunity to think about what weight loss ads looked like and what kind of impact that they had. And then we branched out into a conversation about targeted ads as a whole. And then in the second part of the interviews, I developed these like storyboard comics that illustrated different ways that individuals could resist or mitigate the reach of targeted ads. So I had comics that showed somebody muting an ad, showed somebody sharing an ad to their friends, showed somebody commenting directly on an ad. So I had participants look through these storyboards and compare and contrast some of the methods and see if they had taken any of those strategies themselves. And then we were able to jump off into a conversation about different kinds of approaches in mitigating the reach of these targeted weight loss ads. In total, those interviews were about 45 minutes. Participants were able to brainstorm some really creative strategies using those storyboards, and overall, some really interesting conversations that I'm really glad to share into the world.
The survey data you did came back with you collected at least a few full text prompts where people could share their experiences. Mm-hmm. So it's great because they've given you a dense, information-rich, natural language amount of text, but it's not easy to make a bar graph out of. Could you talk about some of the steps to quantify some of that data?
Yeah, I actually want to clarify that we didn't conduct a survey. We conducted a set of interviews. So all of the data that we collected is qualitative, and we didn't try to quantify any of it. That's something that I would be open to like future researchers doing, but all of our data was qualitative. And it was a set of one-on-one 45-minute interviews.
Gosh, sorry, I thought I read something about there was tagging going on where you were like clustering them the inductive interpretivist approach. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's a method that we can use in qualitative data. So we coded the qualitative data. So we went through the interview data, like the transcripts themselves, and started coding, which is much less technical than it sounds. It's basically grouping like themes together across interviews.
Could you talk more about that process? I'm not familiar with that methodology, but it sounds like it's productive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So my co-author and we sent off all of the interviews to a transcription service. And then once we got those transcripts back, we took time to read through all of them and then generate a list of some high-level themes that we started to see. And then we went through all the transcripts and highlighted specifically in the text where we saw those high-level themes coming out. And then we came back together and started to draw out some of the relationships between those themes and get some more in-depth, more detailed themes coming out. And then we kept iterating on that process and coming back together, which is how we got some more detailed and nuanced themes.
Are there any themes you want to highlight that really came through strongly in the work?
I'm really interested in the various sources of harm that participants saw in targeted weight loss ads. I think this is really important to highlight because a lot of what's focused on as a harm in targeted advertising is the targeting itself, but that wasn't the only thing that participants felt harmed by. So one of the major sources of harm that we saw for people with histories of disordered eating was that they felt like the data that they had produced was persistent over time. So they felt like they couldn't escape their digital footprints that they had created maybe years ago or months ago in the really like the depths of their eating disorders. That data, they felt like it was used to target them over and over again, even though felt like they were recovering from their eating disorders. So I think that's a really interesting theme. It kind of opens up these questions of like, what does it mean to be forgotten by the internet? especially when it comes to sensitive health data. Another source of harm that we found through the interviews was that participants felt like their interests were really oversimplified by targeting algorithms. The intuitive eating community, yes, it's focused around eating and diet and exercise, but in ways that are framed as appropriate for people with histories of disordered eating. But the participants felt, oh, just because we have the words eating, food, diet in our communities and in our search histories, that doesn't mean we want typical weight loss ads. So they felt like targeting algorithms really missed a lot of the nuance when it comes to interests and indicating interests. Another source of harm that we encountered was the designs of the ads themselves. So a lot of these typical weight loss ads, and I include screenshots in the paper, a lot of them have these kind of like design patterns that we can think of as dark patterns, which is a term used to describe design that is intentionally used to mislead consumers or have them act against their best interest. So a lot of these ads have this kind of like very personalized language. A lot of them have interactive quizzes that you can take that provide you with these seemingly personalized exercise regimens or diets to follow. These kind of patterns are known to increase engagement, but our participants felt like they were really harmful because they caught users at their most vulnerable states. So one of the ways that we thought about engagement with these kind of dark design patterns is digital self-harm, which are online activities that impair a person's well-being. And a lot of our participants felt like engagement with targeted weight loss ads was actually symptoms of their disordered eating patterns. There are lots of different sources of harm when it comes to advertising that targets people based on sensitive health data.
Well, I realize this question is slightly out of scope for what you set out to do. You identified the three areas, but do you have any speculation on how much of the pie each of them share? Are they equally problematic, or could we make big progress by addressing just one of them or something like that?
Sure. I think they're harmful in different ways. I think a lot of these areas of harm require just a greater level of transparency from platforms and advertisers and giving users more control over what data is collected and used to target them. So when we think about the persistence of data, what might it look like if an ad told you exactly what kind of data they were using to target you, or if platforms gave advertisers more insight on that? And like, what would it mean to have all of your data forgotten after a year, or like a month, or some other specified amount of time? A lot of the things that we've searched in the past don't feel relevant anymore to us in the present. So I'm wondering how transparency from advertisers themselves and platforms might help this problem.
Are you seeing the platforms doing anything to move in the direction of more transparency?
There's a new Instagram feature that came out this summer where users can opt in to see less of a topic in their advertising. And one of those topics is weight loss. So we were really excited about this when it came out, that users are actually able to indicate that they want to see less weight loss advertising on Instagram. But of course, comes like my optimistic caution when it comes to features like this. We need a lot more insight in how weight loss advertising is defined. And I think that without having actual harmed members of the disordered eating community speaking out about what that looks like, it's not going to be clear what ads are counted as weight loss ads. A lot of these ads don't say weight loss outright. They'll use kind of like language that feels a little bit more vague. I also think we need a lot more transparency into how these see less features work. And also, this doesn't get rid of the problem exclusively, because seeing less doesn't mean seeing none. And I know that they can't make that promise, but again, this kind of feature is only confined to one platform, and it doesn't guarantee that users won't see weight loss ads at all. This points to a lot more future auditing that can happen, where researchers like my colleagues can conduct these kind of algorithmic audits to really see how successful this feature is in eradicating weight loss advertising on Instagram.
Yeah, I hope there's a long and fruitful relationship with academia, because this stuff should be studied and the results should inform the actions taken.
Absolutely. I think when these kind of features are introduced, we need a lot more transparency and insight in how many weight loss ads they actually blocked, for example, or how specifically they're defining weight loss ads, or where users are able to label an ad as weight loss so that the classification algorithms can work better and better. I think there's a lot more opportunity for platforms to communicate with users and for users to give feedback in that way. So I remain hopeful for the future. And I think that there are a lot of interesting policy and design implications to come from this research.
Well, I don't want to oversimplify the situation, but do you think we might just want to broadly recommend ad blockers as the right solution for the most at-risk groups?
Yeah, and that's something that our participants were thinking a lot about. A lot of them had installed ad blockers because weight loss advertising was so pervasive that it really interfered in them having safe online experiences. So sure, some of our participants installed ad blockers, but at the same time, there are issues with these third-party ad blockers. Like, they might not work on mobile. They might not work in, like, shared home environments where you might get an ad through, like, your Amazon Alexa or something like that. I think ad blockers can do a lot, but also they don't cover all types of ads, and they don't cover ads that you might see in a shared environment, perhaps. I also think that that can be kind of a Band-Aid solution to a problem that requires a lot of structural intervention.
Do you think that the platform should be doing more due diligence or, restricting certain ads? Is there any amount of responsibility you think should probably be placed on the platforms themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that our participants spoke to, but I think that they were pretty hesitant in recommending those changes only because they felt like participants thought that they were too small of a group to really make a difference to like a Meta or a Twitter or something like that. But I absolutely think that platforms could be doing more to make sure that anything related to health is substantiated by scientific evidence and making it difficult to target people based on their sensitive health data.
And I'm curious where this particular work fits within the tapestry, if you will, of your overall research interests. Is this a stepping stone, or how does it fit in with other things you're interested in?
Yeah, I've really been interested in how conceptions of online privacy affect individual identity and relationships and domestic life. This project really made me think a lot about the trade-offs between an individual's privacy and their identity. So a lot of our participants had to make lots of really big decisions about how they behaved online in order to keep themselves safe. And I think that's a really big ask of everyday people. I've also been really interested in how young people negotiate location tracking with their family and friends. So I think that's another one of those instances of privacy decision making really being more about self and relationships rather than it is about like the nitty-gritty data collection or technical aspects. So I'm really interested in that notion of privacy decision making as a reflection of self, relationships, and community.
Well, weight loss is a topic that I think everyone thinks about at some point. And I mean, as long as your doctor says you're a person who maybe should lose weight, then it's good to follow their advice. And maybe you'll go to Google and you'll search for weight loss. And there are good products out there. I, for one, can recommend, I've gotten some of these like low-calorie snack packs. Those help me control intake. So I wouldn't mind an ad for something like that. I don't think that's bad. Where are the lines here that you think we should be most concerned about?
Sure. I think that's a really good question because on its face, weight loss advertising might not be inherently problematic, but I do think it reflects a culture of kind of like what we were talking about earlier in our conversation, how these values of thinness and temperance have always been really prevalent in our society. And I think that's worth interrogating why weight loss advertising might be so rampant. But like I said, on its face, it's not quite inherently problematic. But I think when it becomes problematic is when these weight loss ads are targeted to people based on data that they've produced that, when put together, one can infer that somebody has had disordered eating habits or an eating disorder. So I think that even though to most people these ads might just be like annoying, or some people might even find them helpful, we really need to think about how vulnerable people might interpret and internalize weight loss advertising online. And I think also the method of delivery, having such an individualized ad experience, also contributes to the potential for harm. It's not inherently sensitive, perhaps, to have weight loss advertising, but when it's specifically targeted to people who have experienced eating disorders, that's when it becomes problematic. And I think we need a lot more transparency and insight to how we go from A to Z in that process.
Well, I'm imagining two ways in which this sort of targeting can happen. Maybe in the first case, and I would say this is the rather villainous case, it's where, a company says, let us try and micro-target people who have eating disorders and sell them our products. And then second, there's sort of an accidental case where some algorithms on what seem like reasonable parameters end up targeting those people with weight loss ads. Do you have any insight into which is more realistic for the real world or which you're more concerned about?
We think that it might look a lot more like the first situation, but it's actually a lot more boring, and it looks like the second situation in reality. I think we don't know exactly what is happening, and there could be instances of both. Yes, an evil supervillain who's targeting people with eating disorders, but my hunch is that it's probably just more likely somebody who was Googling a lot about weight loss, so they got weight loss ads, and that makes a lot more sense. But I think how this data is collected and put together can really be interrogated. So yeah, I'm worried about targeting algorithms that aren't able to really have nuance in the ways that they kind of construct a narrative or a profile about somebody.
Well, Liza, what's next for you?
I am currently thinking about that project that I mentioned earlier about young people and their decision making when it comes to location sharing and how that affects family life and domestic life. I am finishing my coursework at UC Berkeley before I move on to research full time. So I'm kind of in the middle of the whole Ph.D. process, not quite close to dissertation, but finishing coursework.
Well, cool. Yeah, sounds like you're making good progress, and I look forward to seeing what else you publish.
Thank you so much.
Is there anywhere people can follow you online?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Liza_Gak. That's my Twitter. You can also check out my personal website, which is just my first name, last name.com, Lizagak.com. That's where you can find me.
Cool. We'll have links to both in the show notes. Well, Liza, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share your work.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Work like Liza's highlights important cultural and social questions around privacy. While we can debate if too much, too little, or the right amount of effort has been put into privacy efforts, there's no ignoring changes are happening. The platforms themselves are slowly but surely moving towards a more consumer privacy-focused point of view.
Now the problem for advertisers now is that third-party cookies are going away. Safari has already blocked third-party cookies. Firefox has already blocked third-party cookies. Google Chrome is dragging feet a little bit, but by the late 2024, Google Chrome will also be blocking third-party cookies.
That's next week on Data Skeptic Ad Tech.